Okay, good morning. Good time to turn off ringers on your phones. If you haven't already. And if you have any documents for us, they go to Mr. Curran. We've got a good crowd today for good reasons. And to get us rolling, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Bell. Curran.
Here.
Greeley.
Present.
Harrison.
Here.
Hinkleman.
Here.
Ott.
Present.
Pitchford.
Here.
Tyler.
Here.
Borath.
Here.
Werfel.
Here.
Yarborough. Elliott, you have 10.
Thank you. Minutes from a week ago need to be approved. Is there a motion? Moved by Pitchford, supported by Volrath. Any discussion? Hearing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
That's just a voice vote.
Oh, that's right. Voice.
Okay.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign.
You need coffee?
No, I did my routine this morning down on campus and I got clocked. Anyway, requisition review.
Good morning.
Good
Does
morning.
anybody have any questions about the requisition list? Perfect, thank you.
I think we have some guests.
Yes, today we'd like to welcome Sheriff Chuck Height with some life-saving awards.
Thank you for having us. As we've said before, we appreciate the opportunity to recognize some of the great work in public at your meeting. So we appreciate that. Many of these from last year, it takes a little moving parts to get it. We've got a committee, as I think we've talked about before, an awards committee that looks at incidents and then recommends the award to be given. So we have those here this morning. We've got Deputy Cameron Newbecker, Deputy Sam Whitaker, and then Deputy Sabrina Lorado. We'll talk about hers, but she was not able to be here today. And then we have another presentation after that. So the undersheriff has a little bit on each, and Cameron, we'll call you up first.
Thank you for your time. It makes us proud to recognize the deputies here that put service to our community before sometimes their own safety. I'd like to talk about Cameron Newbecker's been with us for about 3.5 years and is the son of Director of St. Joe Public Safety, Steve Newbecker, who's also in attendance. So taking you back to November 7th, about midnight of 2025 up in in Watervliet. Cameron responded to a disturbance up there. An individual is having a mental health crisis, was arguing with his family members and actually jumped out of a window at the residence. Now with bloodied hands, broke into the neighbor's house and was confronted by the neighbor. He fled the scene into the woods and ends up in the Paw Paw River. The individual had a large stick and was swinging the stick, believing that other responding officers there were there to harm him. Officers tried to calm him down and convince him to get out of the river. The temperature was about 47 degrees. The water temperature was roughly that. And Cameron understood that the longer he stayed in the water, the more dangerous the situation was going to become. Officers tried to throw a rescue disc and convince the individual to grab onto it so they could pull him to safety, but the individual refused, believing that the officers were there to harm him. Cameron saw an opportunity, and with him and a trooper, Taylor, jumped into the water and wrestled the individual to the bank of the river, where they were helped by other officers and pulled out. They got that individual to the ambulance for him to be treated for his physical and mental health issues there. So we're very proud of his actions on that day. Again, like I said, putting the community and this person's well-being before his own safety.
So with that, I'll read the certificate of commendation to Deputy Cameron Newbecker This certificate of commendation is presented with honor and gratitude in recognition of your actions on November 7th, 2025. You responded to a disturbance called in Waterville Township involving an individual experiencing a mental health crisis who fled and ended up waist deep in the Paw Paw River. Despite the cold, muddy conditions, you entered the water to assist in securing the individual and safely bringing him to the river's edge. Your quick response and decisive actions were instrumental during this critical situation. Thank you. So Cameron, since he goes first, he's got to stay up front for the.
The next one we're going to talk about is Sam Whitaker. Sam's been with us for about 2 years.
Has a life-saving award already.
Yeah, I was going to say, you might recognize him, but he performed CPR on and saved a life not too long ago down in New Buffalo Township and was recognized for that. On this occasion, August 23rd of 2025, he was again patrolling New Buffalo Township, driving down Marquette Drive, when a female riding a bicycle was traveling over some loose sand and flipped over the handlebars, suffered quite some serious injuries, a broken collarbone, broken arm, and a lot of cuts and scrapes. He immediately stopped traffic, jumped out to assist her in that occasion, put her hand in the sling and helped her in that case. So we'd like to recognize him for his actions.
So this again is another certificate of commendation. This certificate of commendation is presented to you with honor and gratitude for your assistance on August 23rd, 2025, where there was a critical incident involving a cyclist who had taken a bad fall in the middle of the one-lane road. She was seriously injured and there was oncoming traffic. Your ability to act quickly and maintaining composure and keeping the cyclist calm were instrumental in saving her. We'll do photos in a minute.
I think we get one.
It's a trifecta. Yeah. You never know.
The next incident I'd like to talk about is with Deputy Sabrina Larada, who's not in attendance today. This goes back to May 28th of 2025. On that occasion, a couple of male individuals were at the New Buffalo Beach practicing swimming and with hopes of entering the military services. On their way back to their car, they were walking down Whitaker Street, and one of them decided to jump off of the Whitaker Street Bridge into the Galene River. He did that in front of his friend and a number of other people, and unfortunately something happened where after he jumped in, he failed to come up. First responders responded to the scene, and ultimately a call for our dive team went out. Deputy Larada responded with other members of the dive team, and by the time they got there, this was in the evening or dark, it became dark out. Family members and friends responded, and the decision was made to at least try to go in and recover the body. Unfortunately, some time had elapsed and this turned into a recovery as opposed to rescue. Deputy Larada suited up in her wetsuit or dry suit, went into the water. Now, diving in Michigan can be a challenge due to the visibility in the water. Compound that at night, and she explained that she couldn't see the light she was holding in her hand, and that's how dark it was. Despite the other deputies hearing the uneasiness in her voice while she was communicating with them via radio, she put the mission first and began to do a perfect grid search pattern and ultimately discovered the individual, giving closure to the family. So although this has a tragic ending, she performed her mission despite her fears. And I think that's always great to be recognized by the public for her actions. So we'll be presenting an award to her.
Yes, we'll present this to her, but it's a certificate of commendation again, presented to you with honor and gratitude for your actions on June 28th, 2025, where the Berrien County Dive Team was requested and activated to respond to New Buffalo for a subject that jumped off the bridge and did not resurface. Upon arrival, it was determined that the diver would be exceptionally challenging and due to the nightfall. Without hesitation, you were able to successfully carry out the mission with bravery, skill and determination, your selfless actions, and commitment to do what was best for the family. This individual is highly commendable. So I was there. It brought a lot of closure to the family for that. So congratulate her. The next one, I'm honored. Ken Jewell, we have one more. It's not a person. Yeah, it's all right. Ken Jewell, Kenny, if you'd come up. So some may recognize the last name. The legacy of the Jewell family in the sheriff's office is pretty profound. Ken's dad was Sheriff Forrest Nick Jewell. His son, Nick, who's here, is also a deputy with us. John Jewell worked part-time, then Dan Jewell's a retired lieutenant. So it goes, service from the Jewell family goes deep. And Kenny spent 30 years with our reserve unit. So we honored him with a certificate at the reserve banquet around Christmas time, but his badge had not come in yet. So since it came in, I said, you know what, we're going to do this the right way. I want to present him with his retired badge for 30 years of service with the reserves. You know, we look at the law enforcement career, a 25-year career. This is 30 years of volunteer service for that. So thank you. Thank you, sir. So Annette, whatever you want. Now it's your. Absolutely.
You should have got an award for getting a tree and get his uniform.
That's all right. But in all sincerity, thank you again for allowing us to do this. It's a nice way to honor the work that was done. So thank you again. And we're going to go down the hall for our other photos.
Thank you all. Yeah, thank you.
And next, we have a presentation.
From Dan Fetty, Community Development Director on Transportation Update. Thank you, Dan.
All right, good morning. Well, Annette's helping get the presentation going. Last Friday, I appeared at the CEO Council lunch meeting. This is the chief elected officials meeting that's held, I think, once a month, sponsored by the Southwest Michigan Regional Chamber. And it's a collection of the chief elected officials from most of the communities in Berrien County, and oftentimes the chief administrative official of that community as well. So supervisors, managers, mayors, and so forth. At the meeting also, Bob was there, Terry, Mamie, Jim, representing Berrien County and the specific purpose, and Mike, sorry, thank you. Oh, Choka was there too, yeah. Boy, I'm
Yeah.
forgetting that. Well, we don't want to say too much, but we had quite a few people there. Yeah, merely as listeners. And the purpose of the meeting was to discuss public transportation in Berrien County, specifically to discuss the MDOT letter that the county board received last August, announcing that federal and state funding was being reassigned, or the intention was to reassign that federal and state funding for transportation services from Takata to a new regional transit authority that MDOT is requesting the county take the initiative in creating. So that was the purpose of the discussion at the lunch meeting, kind of brief all the communities about what the plan could be moving forward and what the risks would be to the communities if no action were taken. So I think it was a pretty useful experience, and we got a lot of positive feedback from the local communities. And the commissioners that attended asked me to come today and kind of give the same presentation to the commissioners that weren't present Friday. Now, this is a very long presentation, so I'm going to try to truncate this and just hit the highlights. Ned, I don't know if they've all received copies of this by email or.
Yes.
Okay, so you can read in detail some of the other slides that I'm going to skip over because I'm just going to hit the highlights here. And the most important thing to note and the big highlight is that if nothing gets done between now and August, there's a possibility that about 150,000 annual passenger rides will disappear overnight due to lack of funding. So I'm going to explain why that's going to be the case and what the impacts would be on the community if no action's taken. So first, to just reiterate, on August 15th of last year, MDOT sent this board a letter notifying you that beginning on October 1st of this year, Ben Harbor Dial-A-Ride Takata, which we refer to, one of the 4 local transit providers, it will no longer be eligible to receive state and federal funding. Furthermore, MDOT requested the Berrien County Board of Commissioners incorporate a new countywide transit authority under Act 196 and have that authority act as the new legal recipient and designee for all future urban and also rural transit funding. Without a new regional authority designated to receive these funds, roughly half of the population in Berrien County, that would be the urbanized area running approximately from New Buffalo up the coastline through Bridgman, Lincoln Township, St. Joe Township, City of St. Joe, Benton Harbor, and Benton Township, and in fact, now all the way up through Hager Township along the coast. That entire area will basically be without public transportation services starting October 1st, if nothing occurs. Additionally, as this board is well aware, Berrien Bus and Takata are currently operating at annual deficits, and those deficits, unfortunately, are growing. And without some kind of intervention on a permanent basis, rural operations, that is Berrien Bus, will cease to exist due to lack of funding. This year, as you recall, we requested and the commissioners agreed to provide a direct $250,000 subsidy to Berrien Bus to keep it operating throughout this year while we try to find the solution to this issue. So again, if nothing occurs by October 1st, if a new transit authority is not created and designated to receive federal funds, all urban transportation will cease to exist. And in all likelihood, by the end of this calendar year, rural transportation will cease to exist as well. That would essentially amount to about 150,000 passenger rides that would be eliminated, annual passenger rides. Now, I want to be clear, this isn't 150,000 individuals. These are passenger rides. The number of individuals that constitute those 150,000 passenger rides, roughly, we believe, is about 10,000 to 12,000 people in Berrien County annually are riding the bus system. So approximately 8% of the population is utilizing the transportation services on a routine basis. Failure to address MDOT's request will result in the loss of all federal and state operating assistance. That would eliminate 63% of the county's total annual transportation rides. Combined with operating deficits of Berrien and Takata, they're over $250,000 without a year. Without intervention, those rural operations will also cease. That's another 14% of the county's total annual rides. So that's where the 150,000 passenger figure comes from. Now, critically, of that, about 55,000 of those rides are utilized by elderly and disabled passengers who essentially depend on this service for their only form of mobility. So we're talking about, of that 55,000 rides, we're probably talking somewhere between 5,000 to 6,000 people in the county who are elderly and disabled that will be left without mobility options or transportation options. I'm going to emphasize this slide and then I'll skip through some of these because this is really kind of, I think, the important one to understand. I think the commissioners are familiar with this, but I want to reiterate what we're talking about with urban and rural transportation. The blue area down here is the urbanized region that encompasses Niles and Buchanan. Niles Dial-A-Ride receives federal and state funding to provide urban transportation services here. It also, by contracts, operates the Buchanan dial-a-ride system. Okay, so we have 4 systems, but really we have 3 operating systems because Niles runs Buchanan right now. Commissioners may remember Berrien County used to run Buchanan. Buchanan has now been reclassified as an urban community, so Niles runs them as part of the urban system in the south part of the county. The kind of tan color here is the rural area. Everything in tan is Berrien Bus's jurisdiction. We get state and federal funding through different sources than urban funding to run this rural operation system. And that's a demand response system. You call us, we come pick you up, we take you where you need to go, we drop you off. The orange and the green, this is the urban area that Takata is supposed to be serving, more or less, okay? Everything in orange is part of the urban area that currently does not receive transportation services at all. Takata is only serving the green area, despite the fact that they're receiving state and federal funding to provide service throughout this entire orange area. They are only currently serving the green area on a routine basis. The reason for that is that there is no matching local funding to provide service in these areas. Whereas in the Benton Harbor region, they have a dedicated millage that the voters approved, and therefore Takata is focusing their efforts on this green area. So roughly, I think in the next slide, I'm going to talk about this. I think 34,000 people live in this unserved area currently. They're just simply not receiving service. This is the operating costs and service plans for the current systems as they exist. You see Takata provides about 122,000 passenger rides every year. 34,000 of those are to disabled or elderly individuals. They're operating, when you break it all down, their vehicle hours, their expenses and so forth, they're operating at about $62 per vehicle hour, which is actually a pretty cheap operation by comparison to some other systems. Niles Dial-A-Ride, obviously a smaller system. They do about 44,000 passenger rides, about almost 45,000. That includes Buchanan. Of that, more than half of their passenger rides are elderly and disabled individuals, and they're operating at about $66 per vehicle hour. Again, fairly inexpensive, fairly efficient operating costs. Berrien Bus, we're the smallest in terms of passengers. We handle 27,000 passenger rides a year. This is all in the rural area. Of that, 20,000 of those are elderly and disabled. Almost all of our work is for elderly and disabled individuals. We're operating at about $67 an hour. That's about as thin as we can make it, because if you think about it, running buses over a much longer distance, we have more vehicle time per passenger. So the cost, it's difficult to keep that cost low because you run a bus with only 2 people and you're running it, say, 30 miles as opposed to Takata that may have 6 or 7 people on a bus running at only 2 miles. So in total, there's 195,000 passenger rides a year, 83,000 of which are elderly and disabled individuals. The total cost for these systems combined is almost $3.8 million, and it operates at about $64 to $65 an hour, which is cheaper than most systems throughout Michigan. As I said, 34,000 residents, approximately 47% of the urban area have limited or no service at all. Key areas like Bridgman, St. Joe Township, Lincoln Township, and New Buffalo have no service and remain isolated. And of the total number of jobs in Berrien County, only 66% of those job locations are served by public transportation, right? 34% of the jobs in Berrien County have no access to public transportation. You can imagine what that does in terms of limiting employment options. The 4 distinct providers create duplicative administrative functions like HR, accounting, and procurement. This creates higher overhead that diverts from resources like direct transit services. But the biggest structural problem here is that by the fiscal year 2027, Takata will no longer be eligible to receive transit funds and won't be able to provide direct transit services to St. Joe, Benton Harbor, the Lake Michigan coast area. Berrien Bus is spending down its reserves at an unsustainable rate and is going to cease operations in the rural area without intervention. So I'm not going to go through all of this, the complexity of the system, the burden that it places on passengers. We've talked about this many, many times in previous presentations. I think everyone understands that we're doing the best we can with the systems we have, but it's far from ideal and very inefficient for the people that use it. So with MDOT's announcement that funding is being cut from Takata, it presents an opportunity to address at long last what we've all recognized to be some of the very structural problems that we've talked about over and over. The objective has to be to preserve the existing transit services right now. We can't afford to lose those 150,000 passenger trips. It's going to have a very harmful impact on some of the people that are in most need of assistance. So we need to preserve the existing systems and find a way to bring these systems together into a new cohesive engine for social and economic opportunity. The only way to do this is through a unified service model that you've seen before, and that comes from what we call the Go-Berrien model that was developed in the consolidation plan of 2014, and then ultimately in the service plan of 2018. Again, we've talked about this many, many times in the past. I'm not going to go through those plans in detail. I think everyone here has read them. The idea was to create basically a unified system with coordinated demand response, expanded hours, and a fixed route system that would run high demand lines up and down the coast along US 12, up and down 31, out to 94, 96, and it kind of link the population centers by fixed route and then deviate by demand response. Again, call in, get the ride, kind of the taxi service you can think of. It had a unified fare system, a one-click, one-call center for reservations and scheduling. This was developed in 2018. Now we would probably just do it on an app-based system to try to save money. And this is what we think a unified system would look like if we were to expand service into the unserved area. These are the actual operating expenses of the three systems right now. This is the operating revenue of those three systems showing their surplus or deficits. You see Takata has a slight deficit, DART has a slight surplus. We have a large deficit. To serve the unserved area with demand response, expanding into fixed route, we think is going to cost another $1.6 million. Of that, we think we could generate about $120,000 a year in fare box revenue. We would get state and federal funding of $560 from the state, $635,000 from the feds, leaving a potential deficit of $285,000 to run service in that unserved area. Adding that to the existing deficits of the systems, to do all of this, to create a unified system and start providing service in that urban area, the communities as a whole would have to come up with an extra $500,000 annually to provide for that. Again, this kind of reiterates how those numbers would work. Preserving the service, we'd need about $215,000 to offset current operating deficits. We'd need about $285,000 to provide local funding to expand service in the unserved area. If we wanted to establish weekend service and high demand fixed route service, that would be another $1 million total. That may be possible moving forward in the years to come, but right now our focus is preserving what we have and trying to expand into that urban area. MDOT has committed that if the county were to create this authority and if the county were to begin expanding service into the unserved area, MDOT has a source of funds called the Service Initiative Funds, and they would provide 100% of the operating revenue needs for this new system year one, 80% year two, 60% year three. The purpose of this, yeah, Chokwe. That would be the operating deficit. They would cover the operating deficit. Now, obviously, there'd be new state and federal funds coming in because we'd be moving into this urban area. So, I showed you over about 1.1 million of new state and federal funds. The operating deficit that the unified system would have, MDOT's going to cover that deficit entirely year one, 80% year two. And the idea there is to allow the services to expand immediately while giving time to the communities to find a long-term funding structure that works. The way we could implement this is basically the county responds to MDOT's request, incorporates this new transit authority now. We begin establishing the organization by impaneling the authority and providing for staff support. The new authority, if you think about this, isn't going to have buses, they're not going to have drivers, they're not going to have dispatchers, not right away. There's no way to do it by October 1st. So that new authority would have to partner with the existing bus systems to buy essentially transportation services from Takata, Berrien Bus, and Niles. In other words, the new authority is essentially the bank. It holds the money from the state and federal government, and then it expends those funds by purchasing services from the existing systems for the time being. Doing that, we could immediately expand in the urban area and also preserve what we have. Over time, what would have to happen is that those existing bus services would have to come under the direct control and operation of the new authority. And eventually the assets of those systems, Berrien Bus, Takata, Niles, would have to be novated to the new authority. That's going to take a considerable amount of time, years to do. But initially we could set up the authority as essentially a new holding company that takes federal and state money and expends that by purchasing service from the existing systems. Now, this is what we presented to the group on Friday. I don't feel that I'm in a position to tell this board what they need to do in terms of decisive leadership. This is your decision. But it is clear that if nothing's done by October 1st, state and federal funding for urban transportation along the Takata route is going away. And those that are currently receiving service from Takata will likely not be receiving service, and there'll be no opportunity to expand into the urban areas. That's 150,000 passenger rides and 55,000 seniors and persons with disabilities that will no longer have a way to reach their health care, their groceries, and their recreational employment opportunities. So what we asked of the group Friday was whether or not they'd be willing individually as local political units to either issue resolutions of support to create this new authority, or at least letters of support to create this new authority. The idea is if the county is going to have to take the first step in incorporating this transit authority, I don't want to speak on behalf of the commissioners that were present, but my read of the situation is that move would be easier and more comfortable to do, knowing that you had the support of the local communities that would be most impacted by this creation. I am going to start making the rounds at a number of the communities, asking them for letters of support or resolutions of support for this. And I think the first step is St. Joe Monday night, and then we'll start making the rounds to other communities asking for the same material. The clock is ticking, however, and if the county is going to act, we have to consider acting quickly, because there are public notice requirements. There are provisions that the local communities have an opportunity to review this. We have to coordinate the creation of the articles with MDOT and the Office of the Great Seal. So there's a lot of legwork that needs to go into this, and if it's going to happen, we need to start moving now. That's all I have. I'll answer any questions.
Well, the villages that are currently.
They're going to have to remain in place for the time being because they provide a critical component of local funding. Remember, the idea is preserve what we have first and foremost, and then start the expansion process. And the only way we're going to be able to preserve those existing services is keep the millages in place temporarily.
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of communities would it be helpful for the with to try to help get some.
Any thoughts on that?
I would think it's better coming from Dan. It would. I think that he knows the case, he knows the history. That's not to say that a commissioner can't support that, you know, from municipalities that they take care of, but I think it's better that it comes from the central source.
I think better that it come from administrative staff level right now than with board members directly.
I'm happy to do that. We can draft up, kind of a draft letter or draft resolution and circulate that to the local communities. In fact, many of them on Friday requested that, so I'm happy to do that.
Because the devil's in the details. We haven't had a full briefing on the enabling statutory framework for this authority. The funding mechanisms, I think we're all pretty much familiar with, and ultimately it's millage based. Because I don't think it's sort of thing that a special assessment district could properly be used for. But how is the authority created? How is it constituted? Who is the governing elected body over that authority? Because someone has to be accountable. The last thing we want to do is to, you know, be in Frankenstein's laboratory and create a creature of statute that takes off down the road and we don't really have any control over it. Being a conduit for funding gives you responsibility without any authority, and I would be reluctant to do that, and I'm troubled by the article in the Palladium earlier this week, which suggests a lack of proactivity, chronic lack of proactivity, and perhaps a waiting game based on some notion that, well, if I don't do anything long enough, the state will come in and rescue me. And that's a bus I don't want to ride on personally. But any other thoughts, sir?
Can we, get an official briefing from BCAT on what their stance is as far as how they would advise the full board to move forward on this?
We could do that next month, I would think. Bob, Jim, Harry, okay.
Thank you.
But, I mean, we have to be deliberate about this whole process, because what we create, it's gonna be a lot easier to create it than to unwind it later. Good morning. And the history with public transportation should give us all pause when it comes to the county stepping in and assuming responsibility for something. I mean, are the local units going to want to cede that authority through an authority to the county? Is the county going to have a majority of the votes? If not, then I would not be interested in doing it. Because we have responsibility, we need to have the control to make sure this thing gets done right. Ma'am.
Something else that I've talked about in other committees, or we've talked about in other committees that hasn't been talked about in transportation, it wasn't Friday, or I haven't heard anything today, is the increase of ridership that's probably gonna happen because of the new work requirements for staff and other benefits. So, which just started, I think in February, so I think you're gonna see an increase in ridership and an increase in need.
So the way it is now, there's a lot of areas that don't have coverage.
Mhm.
So you create this authority and then that all those areas will now fall into the coverage area.
That's correct.
So what if you have municipalities or townships that don't want to be involved in this, but yet they're still going to be covered? That's correct?
No.
You can't skip, you'll skip them then.
The procedures for this, Commissioner, once the board makes a determination to create the authority, they have to provide notice to all municipalities that are covered by the authority's jurisdiction, and the municipality then has 30 days to formally remove itself from that authority. Okay, and that, I mean, I don't want to try to predict the future, but I would imagine there might be some municipalities in Berrien County that would want to remove themselves because they're rural enough that they really don't have a population that would be robust and served. So, in past experiences, looking at the way other communities have handled this, most recently Calhoun County that went through a similar type of consolidation, it was the case that some rural communities opted out of that consolidation.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Dan, can urban areas within the county do an intergovernmental agreement and form their own authority without the county being involved?
They legally, there is a procedure to do that through Act 7. The problem of doing that is that you'd have to coordinate the activities of 28, potentially 28 separate municipalities. The reason that MDOT has approached this board to do it as a county action is it's probably in practical terms, the only way it can be done. Legally, it could be done through intergovernmental cooperation, but practically that would be very difficult to do. And I'm not aware of a single unit or a single system that was incorporated solely by intergovernmental cooperation agreements.
Yes, sir.
Is the October first deadline, not only for Takata, is that also the deadline? Say if we don't have something in place that the federal and state funds are not available ever again.
They would be, basically, they'd be sequestered at that point and not distributed. I don't know how they're gonna manage that because the federal funding would stop, MDOT would have to hold all of its funds because there'd be no designated recipient for that money. So, practically what would occur is that there would just be no more flow of transit funds into Berrien County. And that's why service would cease to exist.
I guess I was kind of, if you missed that October first deadline.
To make sure that we think through this, is there a point in 2027 if we say we're ready, that they would say, okay, even though transportation services may have halted, that it takes this board a little time to kind of get to a consensus? Is there a world where they're willing to come back to the table after October 1st?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if that would be workable because at that point we would no longer have operating systems. The problem would be, let's say that happens, you have to lay off everyone, right? And then you have a change of heart and you come back and you want to try to restart these systems. You have to rebuild them from the personnel perspective.
Yes,
So I-
sir.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Jim and then Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I've been a part of these discussions ever since 2012. I've attended all the meetings, even the consolidation discussions that were held in the past. I think the question that is before us today is, do we create the authority or do we not create the authority? There, you correct me if I'm wrong, because I've seen it. He already has an outline for creating this authority. What I would suggest, or what I would like to see us do, is authorize Dan to dust that off, update it, put it into something formal that we can look at, and then ask those questions. So if it does address your concerns, because without doing that, we're not gonna know. And, you know, Dan said it many times, we all said, it, the clock's ticking. We have to do something. So I think the question here today is, can we ask Dan to put together the written articles, creating that authority, update it and present it to us, so at least we have something that we can look at and say, yeah, we want to do that, or we want to tweak it, because that's the first step. And I'd like to see us make that first step today, at least start in that direction.
Alex and then Mamie.
So I was just thinking with, all the proposed changes to the property taxes, funds that come from property taxes, if in 3 years after we hit that 60% and MDOT, they will stop supporting it, 60% is the limit. It would have to be continued through a millage because what if the property tax goes through or the AXA tax goes through, no more property, the county then in 3 years is solely going to be responsible for paying
No,
for that?
no, I don't want to create that misunderstanding at all. If the county creates the authority, it is not legally liable for the operations of the authority. Part of the idea here is to get these bus systems out of a situation where they're on the books of the governments right now. Creating the authority makes the authority eligible for funding, and if financially it works, it works. If financially the community after 3 or 4 years is unwilling to support transportation through some kind of dedicated local funding source, which is possible, then that's the authority that winds up operations. Okay, it's not the county that does that. In terms of the assumption that this has to be funded through a countywide millage, that is the most efficient way of doing it, and that's the way most of them are, but it's not the sole way that it's done. I mean, there are other communities that do it through contract contributions from local governments, kind of the hodgepodge model that you see with our ambulance service, where it's directly paid by the local communities. It's not an efficient way of doing it, but it can be done that way.
Mamie.
Yes.
I think since we know the date, we got this letter last August, that we should be ready for the end of the ending date. And I don't know what that means, go buy buses, but to have a real plan, not, expect that they'll go longer. It's been 30-something years.
I think, I do believe that we have a plan. We have an outline of the procedures, the time is, that takes. We remember the county, for those commissioners that were here in 2014, 15, 16, we've been down this road before.
Yeah.
We have draft articles of incorporation. They are outdated. We have resolutions of acceptance, resolutions of intent. We have most of the work already done. To the chairman's point, the devil's in the details, because if history is any judge, what happened the last time we got to this point is the question of who is represented on this authority, who has the seats, who has the votes. And I understand, that's clearly going to be the question here as well. You have three systems whose assets would have to be transferred to this new authority. They've spent money, they've built the personnel, they've built the assets. Presumably those three systems are going to want some supermajority or representation of this new authority. The county, which probably has the most contribute, would also want that. So the challenge we had at the staff level last time around was, how do we write these articles in a manner that provides fair representation from the parties most impacted by this process? And there's no good answer, because that's a political question, right? But that's what we're trying to do, is put something together that gives fair representation to the communities, but also provides a recognition of the systems that are going to have to put skin in the game.
40 years ago, 41 now, we put together the 911 advisory committee. We had a voter approved millage. And then we had to decide how many public service access points did we want, PSAPs. That, for political reasons, ended up being, I think, 6. One of the first votes I made of any consequence on this board, and I made a mistake. I voted for the multiple PSAPs instead of 2. We finally, over time, corrected that. But one lesson learned from that experience was, if the county is providing the funding mechanism, the county has a fiduciary obligation by virtue of acting as the source of the funds. And the fiduciary obligation carries with it some responsibility, because we're acting almost like trustees. We went through that a few years ago when Judge Dwayne helped us clarify things with the senior center millages. And he said, you as a board have an obligation to make sure those dollars are being properly spent and to hold the centers accountable. If we relinquish that, I think that's a dereliction of duty, but that's something we'd have to have resolved on the front end, because if we didn't, it would be very easily fractured. If there's interest in dusting this off, as Jim said, then I think we'd have to coordinate through the administrator to assign corporate counsel and community development director to engage in that, and among other things, to look at the enabling legislation to see if it's similar to what we did with 911 and the creation of a board, which we populated. I don't know if the statute is like with mental health, where it says this person from these
No.
different categories. Good. But we've had multi-county deals before where we worked with Van Buren and Cass, and we're in for 65% of the funding, and we've got 49%, figuratively speaking, of the authority. That's a bad way to operate. So if locals want this to happen, they're going to have to loosen their grip on the funding flow, because can't see doing it if this thing gets going and then we don't have any authority ultimately to direct it, because we're gonna be responsible. We're gonna be putting the money in. So my 2 cents worth, probably more than 2 cents. Anyone else? Do you all want to get the ball rolling, at least to have Dan and Thaddeus under Mike's supervision, make that happen?
That,
Sir,
that's my sense that because it is a complex legal, entity, the time to start on it is now, not in 3 months or 4 months. And
is that okay with you, Mike?
Absolutely.
And I'm confident that our well-qualified corporate counsel can provide great guidance on this.
I would concur. And Dan certainly has the
Oh, and-
history.
And Dan too.
I mean, I didn't realize we'd been doing this since 2012.
What, if I may ask, what timing are we looking at here? Do you want draft articles in front of you for review with the approval procedures laid out, along with answers to the question of if there is a millage, who's the fiduciary and how is the millage distributed? Is that what I'm hearing? And when would you like that material?
Anybody have any timeline? I'm thinking 60 days,
Uh,
not sooner.
it would probably make sense to be in line with also when he has the letters of support. Just so that you have a complete package of community support and what it looks like, so we can make a firm decision at that point.
Yeah, probably running concurrently. I mean, we need a structure.
I'd like to
Um,
see it prior to having to make quick decisions, so.
Understood, yeah.
I'm not necessarily.
Well, we're not, we'll formalize it.
If they're not, the
Just getting
communities aren't
sense
ready with their
right now.
letters of support, that we've at least, what Jim said, so we've at least had a chance to look at it, digest it, ask some questions.
I don't think
Maybe
so.
have the BCAP presentation.
I think it's reasonable that we can have something in fairly developed draft form within the next 30 days.
Which committee wants to initiate this by resolution, so we have a good paper trail?
Finance.
Okay. Finance, we can get a finance resolution in the next 2 weeks. That be doable?
All right, Mac, you're asking us to put a resolution before finance to initiate the process?
Yeah, I mean,
Spelling
John,
out what,
John made the point, can we do this in committee of the whole? I mean, we're getting a sense of the board right now, but I mean, we act through our written resolutions. Approved at a regular meeting, special meeting, whatever. And I think for this, we need an enabling resolution, and I think as much as any we have done of late, this one needs to have a lot of thought put into it, because how it's worded is going to need to stand the test of time. Because we will have some interplay with local units, and the board needs to assert its prerogatives fully as part of this process.
can you clarify more for me, because I'll be the one writing this, what, in terms of an enabling resolution, are you looking for the finance committee to give specific instructions to staff by resolution of what they're expecting the work product to be?
I would think so.
Okay,
And also referencing the enabling legislative framework, and even not necessarily in a now therefore be it resolved paragraph, but leading up to that, something that speaks to the history of this and why we're here and why we need to do something. And 6 months from now, a year from now, someone goes back, says, what did the board do and why did the board do it? That resolution needs to memorialize the process.
I'll work on producing something and review it with you.
Okay, ma'am.
And you have oh, thank you. You have a gentleman working in your department that's retired, that knows probably all the things, all the years. Tell me his name, I can't think of it.
Well, we have a couple retirees working for us. We have Dennis Shu, who is the
Dennis
former
Chu is one,
director.
I know.
And
yeah.
he's providing a lot of assistance on the financial side and the legal side. And we have
Okay.
Paul Gillespie here with us today. He's the former director
Yes.
of Takata.
Thank
And
you.
Paul is now our supervisor down at the Berry and Bus Garage.
Yeah, so there are experts and historians
Right.
in this. I'm a historian.
Yeah, well, and we don't learn the lessons of history, we're doomed to repeat mistakes.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
have been made, and we've seen those. We just read about them in the paper this week. And I sure don't want to engage in any endeavor that perpetuates inefficient operations with accountability to no one. I know I'm being vague. I mean, seriously, if we get into this, we got to do it right.
I'll work to put something together for everyone's review.
Sir.
And I think that's one reason why I suggested that Dan put all this together, so we have adequate time to look at it and digest it. And to Chokwe's point, there's still a lot of unknowns that we don't know that we can tell the locals. If we have something in writing, or at least something that we're looking at, if the locals go, what are you looking at? We can go, here's what we're looking at. It's not a done deal. We're gonna tweak it. We're gonna do whatever needs to be done to it, because that's gonna address, I think, some of your questions.
Well,
And I guess the reason I'm wording it that way is that it's not our normal process that you bring it to us one week and we approve it the next. This is not one of those situations. This is something where we want it now, and then a lot of eyes have to look at it, you know, including corporate counsel, before we pull the trigger on it. Because that's the
erecting
first
a
step.
multi-story building. We're not putting up a pup tent, and there's an awful lot of preparatory work involved. Terry, did you have something?
I did in the work, and possibly this gets wrapped into the resolution. I know that this board has taken action on different stances that we take on public transportation. Dan, if you could also provide that in whatever information you share with this board, because I know when we had this discussion in 2018, I thought that this board took action favorably.
There's a resolution that has never been superseded from, I think it precedes 2018, I think it was 2016, Terry,
Okay.
where the board endorsed the creation of a countywide transit authority.
Yeah.
And I believe that was contingent upon the development of a countywide service plan,
Sure.
which led to the creation of the service plan. But that resolution is still standing. It's never been superseded.
Yeah, that may have even come out of admin 10 years ago, but, because I think
I
we
can
were
provide, I
in
can
there
find a copy and
together.
provide a copy.
Okay, well, it's, important. We've got to bring attention to detail, and we have to make it clear to all affected parties. Once we roll this out, this is our template. If you want to do this, this is how we propose to get it done. If you don't want us involved, okay, go ahead, good luck.
Okay, I'll put something together.
Thank you.
All right.
Anyone else? All right, ma'am.
Will we be working with this company that they're bringing in?
Okay, so Takata has hired a third-party operator to administer their transportation program. VIA is the name of the company. If the county were to move forward and create an authority, and that authority then had to rely on Takata to provide bus services, which is going to have to be the case temporarily, then yes, this new authority would have to work with VIA to keep the buses running, so to speak, okay? Until a greater integration could be achieved. So I have the intention of meeting with the operators of VIA in the next 2 weeks to discuss how they're going to do this and whether or not the contract they have with Takata can be applied towards a new authority as well. Okay.
Does Takata still have a super high deductible for their losses?
The reason they had to get a third-party operator is because they were uninsurable. The third-party operator brings the insurance to the table now, which is also why the costs for Takata are going to rise
Yeah.
on an hourly basis. Their deductible at one point, Mac, I don't want to speak out of turn, but my recollection is it was a $250,000 deductible.
More.
There was a deductible and then there was a copay per incident, and the deductible was $250, and I think the copay per incident was $300 per person per incident. So I mean, one incident could conceivably be $1 million out-of-pocket cost.
And that's one reason to be very careful.
Well, one of the things that we have to coordinate, I know you're running very long, if the county were to move forward, one of the critical steps next would be coordinating with the Michigan Transit Insurance Pool to try to provide coverage for the new authority itself. Takata, they'd have their own coverage issues. They'd have to continue to maintain what they have, but the new transit pool would have to be enrolled, or the new authority would have to be enrolled in the transit pool as well.
Okay, I look forward to having the state's support in this endeavor, because if they don't back us up, it is gonna be their problem.
We will have to prepare an application that we're gonna have to submit to them early summer at the latest for the additional funding assistance that they've promised. That has to go through, there's a formal process to apply for that money.
Right.
And we're gonna have to do that quickly because we're gonna have all the budgets modified to account for that.
It'll
So
be
a lot of steps.
Interesting. Okay,
All right.
sorry for running late, but I think we needed to get this aired out. And we'll head into committees, and if anybody runs late for 10:30, then we'll accommodate. Oh, public comments? None? Thank you. We're adjourned.